like to welcome all of you here today, and especially with this large crowd. We're delighted that so many of you turned out on a little dreary day, but this has been a good day for Lincoln County and Fayetteville since we had an announcement and a groundbreaking of a hotel here that we've been looking forward to for several months and year, and it's finally happening, getting ready to move some dirt for seriousness. But still, it's interesting to see, and we're proud that so many of our industrial plant managers and owners have come out to take a little bit of time to greet this gentleman here. I started calling him a young man, but he's not that much younger than I. Got to see him over at his home when he was mayor, and he took care of the mayors at a TML function. We had a good supper at his home. And we've met him before while he was running back in 2006. But I'm not here to introduce him. I'm going to let the county mayor actually introduce him. But we just like to welcome all of you here, and that's my function. I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you,
to
Mayor.
actually introduce him.
Thank you very
Did you
much.
say accidentally? Accidentally?
Well, you can accidentally.
I echo his words too. I'm proud that you're here, and David, proud you're here. Proud you were here at 11:30 this morning, breaking ground for that hotel. Boy, we're lucky. And so we're just carrying on our luck all day long. As he said, he met him or saw our speaker in 2006, and that's when we elected Senator Corker to the U.S. Senate. And one of the things I read about him, heard about him, or saw about him, or whatever, he started a business with about $8,000 in a pickup truck. It was a construction business. Kind of like we do it today, isn't it? You really made a success, and being mayor of Chattanooga, that's wonderful too. And so if you'll help me, we'll welcome Senator Bob Corker. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mayor and Mayor. I was able to walk in with them and notice how they gave each other a lot of grief in a fun way. And I understand they went to school together and known each other a long time. And it's really good to see the kind of cooperation that I know exists here. And that's what makes counties and cities do well. I want to thank all of you for coming out. I know it's a rainy day, and I just came from Giles County, and actually got some great iced tea, so I'm going to keep it with me. But listen, we're on recess this week, and I'm traveling the state seeing folks. I think a lot of times when we're on recess, people think that we go off to the island someplace or something, but it's actually a time when we're able to accomplish a lot by being with people like you and just talking with you a little bit about what's going on in Washington, and then hearing from you a lot of concerns. Actually, it's rare that I leave a meeting like this that there's not something that we send back to our staff in Washington or take back with us as a thought to pursue. But again, thank you all. I know you've got a busy day. I know Peggy's got a very serious personal issue that all of you are aware of that she's dealing with, and I especially thank you for taking the time to come over here and be with us with your son's condition. So let me first of all say that several of your officials who are here sitting on the front row were over in Chattanooga yesterday. We had a hearing with TVA and some of the other distributors of power throughout our state, and then some heavy industrial users of power. And I thought it was a good hearing. I'm on the Energy Committee, and I have a lot of folks come into my office, into the conference room in Washington, and they'll talk about various topics very bluntly in this conference room when nobody's around, and usually they're all of the same type of group. And so there's been some conflicts about power rates in the valley and all those kind of things. So I told them I was going to get everybody together in one room and we'd hash this out. And of course, on top of that, we've got EPA with all kinds of regulations that are coming out right now, and regardless of what side of the aisle you might be on, we've had regulations increasing in our country for some time, but we're getting to a point where it's actually driving up electricity prices, and when you do that, it makes us as a country a lot less competitive, especially when we're in a global environment that we all know we're in. So we had a good hearing, and I left there learning a little bit. Britt and I were talking about it just a minute ago, but that's the kind of thing that we do. I've spent a lot of time, I know you know, on banking issues. I'm on the banking committee, and I've been in the Senate now 4 years and 9 months. A year into the Senate, we had a change that took place, and I had an opportunity to go on the banking committee, and I asked about 10 senators on both sides of the aisle what they thought about that. And 9 out of 10 said, Corker, whatever you do, don't go on the banking committee. It's the most boring committee in the Senate. And it was kind of boring. I don't know if y'all remember, but Chris Dodd was chairman of the committee. And he was actually running for president at the time, and he had moved his family to Iowa, so he wasn't around. So it really was a boring committee because nothing was happening. All of a sudden, he came back and decided not to do that. And as you know, the world financial markets kind of went to heck in a handbasket, for lack of a better word. And so it became a place where I was able to really work with a lot of Tennesseans, a lot of community bankers and others to try to work through those issues. And I certainly appreciate the cooperation we received in this county, but all over the state and certainly all over the country. Let me just say that we've got an election cycle. It seems like, election cycles are always happening, but we have a presidential race that's already heated up and underway, and there's only one thing left, I hate to say it, that's going to happen in Washington between now and the election that really many of you here in Lincoln County even care about. And that is the actions of this super committee that's been set up to deal with our indebtedness issues. In fairness, there may be some small pieces of legislation that pass. We just passed 3 free trade agreements last week, which are going to be great for the state of Tennessee. In all 3 cases, our manufacturers are going to be able to sell into these countries with tariffs being lowered. They already were selling into ours without tariffs, and so it's kind of a one-way street, and these 3 free trade agreements are nothing but positive for the state of Tennessee. But really the only thing, I hate to say it, that's going to happen is this other activity. And let me just get into a couple of details, and then I'll open things up for questions and comments. I think most of you know that the most major threat, this is my opinion, but I think it's shared by many, the most major threat to our country right now is our own inability to get our fiscal house in order, to make sure that we're living within our means. And I think most of you know that our deficits relative to our economic output are growing tremendously. And I know that all of you, to some attention to what's happening in Europe right now. In essence, Northern Europe has kept their house or gotten their house in order, and Germany and others are actually strong and exporting. And you've got Southern Europe where that has not been the case, and obviously the stronger countries are telling the southern countries what they're going to have to do to get their fiscal house in order. And it's created a lot of instability. You're seeing a lot of social unrest in places like Greece and Italy and other places. And it's because they have not been able, through time, to make the kind of tough decisions that societies have to make to live within their means. As a matter of fact, what's happened there is a lot like what's happened here, and that is politicians have been elected and have been giving people what they want without asking them to pay for it, and things have gotten out of whack. A lot of that's happened just within our culture here in America. And so, in any event, we are faced with those same kinds of problems, and so we passed something called the Budget Control Act in August. It passed August the 2nd, and it was a down payment on the tremendous amount of indebtedness that we have in this country to try to lessen the deficit, the gap we have between income and expenses. And in August, we took $900 billion out of spending over this next 10 years. Most financial analysts and most people who buy our treasuries, when people buy our treasury bonds, what they're really doing is loaning us money, right? I mean, that's what's happening. And so most people who advise people who buy treasuries thought that we should cut at least $4 trillion out of our deficit over the next 10 years. That's certainly what I thought ought to happen. As a matter of fact, I had a bill that would have cut $5 trillion over the next 10 years. Well, we couldn't get to an agreement, and so we took a down payment of $900 billion, and then this super committee was created. Now, there's been a lot of debate. As I go around the state, there are a lot of people who talk to me about this, quote, super committee. This super committee has 6 Republicans and 6 Democrats. If we can't come to an agreement with an equal number of Republicans and Democrats on a committee, we've got problems. I think most of you know that this committee is meeting in private. And a lot of people say, well, no, these meetings ought to be in public. And I think that their goal is to get another $1.2 trillion in deficit reduction over this next 10 years. For what it's worth, because I think public enemy number one in our country is our inability to come to grips with this, I am way okay with them meeting in private, okay? All I want them to do is come to a rational conclusion. And you can imagine, on one hand, you've got Republicans that are obviously reticent to want to raise revenues. On the other hand, you've got Democrats that are reticent to talk at all about entitlements, and yet both have got to come together around a solution. And so, you can imagine being in a public meeting and one offers a solution that his side of the aisle is going to erupt about. It's hard to get to a deal that way. So I'm glad that they're meeting in private personally. I want them to come to a conclusion, again, that's a balanced conclusion. And then what happens after this is the House and Senate both have to vote on it. So a lot of people have said, well, Corker, y'all are admonishing, y'all are abdicating your responsibilities. Well, that's not the case at all. I mean, the fact is that the way Congress is right now, I'd rather us do it under regular order, but Congress, you got Republicans in the House who continually pass bills and they don't get taken up in the Senate. The Senate is controlled by Democrats, the same kind of things happening, and we're not making any progress. And because I believe that this is the number one threat to our country's security, our economic viability, and in every other way, I think this is the next best thing that we can do. And so, to make a long story short, they have to be finished with their work on November the 23rd. They have to have it posted on the internet before the committee votes on it so all of you can see what it is that they're voting on. And if they pass something, the House and Senate both have to take it up. It's called an expedited process. You get an up or down vote. You cannot add an amendment to it. Y'all remember 20 years, some of you don't remember, a lot of us remember, 20 years ago when our country was facing closing a bunch of military bases around our country. And no senator or any House member that had a military base in their district or state was going to volunteer to have it closed, right? I mean, that's just not the way things naturally work. And so we set up this BRAC commission to go through and look at the priorities of our military and decide which are the bases that are most important. And so they brought it to the floor. And again, it was up or down vote. You couldn't say, well, I'll vote for it if Fort Campbell stays operative or whatever. And that's the way we dealt with things. Unfortunately, in the political environment we live in, sometimes tough decisions like that require that. And so that's what's happening with this super committee. For what it's worth, I think instead of $1.2 trillion, they ought to get at least $3 trillion. So you add that to the roughly $1 that we got before. And that's the number that we need to get to. I have signed a letter with 44 senators, half of them are Republicans, half of them are Democrats, to the committee and to the leadership of the House and Senate saying that we believe anything short of that is not getting the job done. I'm traveling to New York Sunday night with 3 Republican senators and 2 Democratic senators to push the same thing up there to try to get more and more people around this country pushing, especially the leadership of the House and Senate, to, quote, go big, to take a bigger step than just the base case so that we can get our country where it needs to go. So anyway, that is about the only thing, candidly, that's going to happen I hate to say it, between now and the election that matters to you. Now, what matters most to your city mayor, your county mayor, and most people in this room, especially a chamber group like this, is what? Employment, right? I mean, that's what people care about. I mean, look, I was an employer most of my life, but also a mayor. And you can talk about all the niceties that you want to talk about, but the thing that people care most about is heads of households having good paying jobs. And so, you know, from my perspective, and I think many thinking people in Washington, the very best thing we can do in this country to help create jobs is to show the American people and to show businesses that invest that we have the ability to deal with these structural problems that we have in the country. So I actually think not only is this deficit reduction committee important as it relates to our debt, it's also the most important thing we can possibly do, in my opinion, to build confidence in this country that we have the ability to deal with our issues. Now, I'll add to it that I've pushed the committee not just to deal with our deficits, but also to go ahead and put in place a 6-year highway bill so that local governments and state governments, instead of these sugary, short-term stimulus deals that basically cause people to rush and do things that they're not prepared to do, and then they go away. You know, it only happens for a short period of time, so you sort of gear up and it goes away. But to really get a 6-year highway bill in place, and for us to really put more emphasis on American energy, and for us to really push for lightening some of the unnecessary, a lot of regulations in our country are necessary, but to lighten the load on many of the unnecessary regulations that we have. I think these meetings right now are going decently well. For what it's worth, there is public commentary, if you will, around jobs bills. I know we have Republicans and Democrats in this room, at least I hope we do. I don't think there's anybody that takes any of the jobs bills that have been put forth very seriously, okay? Because I think most people look at these short-term stimulus issues as being, you know, we're way beyond that as a country. I mean, we tried a stimulus and you know, we've tried a stimulus. I think most people realize that, again, what the country is looking for now is stability. They want to know that we've actually done something for the longer term. So most people, I think, are in the same camp that I'm in, and that is this effort that's underway right now is the most important thing we can do economically and for the future of our country as it relates to spending and getting deficits in line. I'm going to close with one stat and one comment just to show you how tough this issue is. I'm going to give you a stat on Medicare. You know, I go to town hall meetings and I start talking about Medicare or any other part of our entitlement programs, and I can see people's face get red. And, you know, when I finish sometimes, you know, you can see the veins in people's necks sort of popping out. I mean, they're saying, Corker, I paid for these entitlements. I worked all my life, and I've paid into these entitlements. Well, and I've done the same thing. Let me give you the numbers, though, as far as where we are. The average American family, the average American wage earner today in our country earns $43,500. That's the average wage. I know we have regional difference, but that's the average. So in a 2-wage earner family in America, each earning $43,500, that family would make $87,000. That family, over their lifetime, if they started working immediately after they got out of school and never had a day off, they worked the entire time, would pay into the Medicare program $119,000 in today's money. Now, that $119,000, they would actually have paid half of that, and you realize the employer pays half. That's the way it works. You pay a payroll tax, the employer pays the payout. So on behalf of that family, into the Medicare accounts would have gone $119,000. The average American family takes out of Medicare $357,000. So think about that. 119 in, 357 out. And so I think a lot of people think, you know, you could do some minor tweaking with this and it all works. And all of us, I don't know of anybody in the Senate or House that doesn't understand that there are people who've counted on Medicare all of their life, and many are already on it and retired. And I look around the room, no offense, I know some of the people in this room are already on it. And I'm 59, I'm a baby boomer, I'll be, at that age soon. But everyone understands you cannot just jerk the rug out. You can't make drastic changes when people have counted on it. But you've got to begin figuring out a way to cause those two lines to cross. Think about it. I mean, is there any business in here that could possibly function with 119 coming in as income and 357 going out the door as outgo? And again, that is the average. There are cases where it's a lot worse. So obviously that's something that's got to be changed, especially when you think about the fact that over the next 10 years in our country, 20 million more Americans are going to be on the program. I mean, my generation's getting ready to come through. And then on top of that, we're going to have the lowest ratio of people working to retire that we've ever had in the history of our country. Now, I just lay all that out not to scare anybody because, again, Congress will deal with these issues, I think, in gradual and appropriate manners, hopefully. But it just points out the sort of the complexity of the kinds of problems that we have in the country. And by the way, I started talking about these stats some time ago. And every 3 months I have to change the numbers because what's happening is healthcare inflation is going up so much faster than wage inflation that just 90 days ago, the stats that I was laying out were closer together, but the gap is widening because of the way healthcare costs are going up and wage inflation is not going at the same rate. So, it's going to take some flexibility on both sides of the aisle to deal with this issue. We've got 6 Republicans and 6 Democrats, very capable people negotiating. And again, to me, it's the most important step and the only real important step that I think we're going to take between now and the election. I hope it's successful. I hope the package that comes forth is something that I can support. I'm certainly giving lots of input to the committee and doing everything I can to charge them to go as big as they can. So with that, I'd like to just close by saying one thing. We all talk about American exceptionalism, and we're really proud of our country, I know, and it's regardless of some of the problems we have before us. By the way, we're going to be dealing with these issues. This last issue I pointed out, I think, is the issue of the next decade for our country. I mean, you're not going to deal with this with 1 bill or 2 bills. I mean, this is what we're going to have to be dealing with as a country, in my opinion, for the next decade. And, of course, the best way to deal with these kind of issues is to have tremendous growth, right? I mean, it's amazing how growth will mask so many problems. So we can get the environment right, like the state of Tennessee has done so well within our own state. If we can get the environment right for growth, then a lot of this will be easier to deal with. But as we talk about American exceptionalism, we all think about the things that we do around the world and the way that lives are changed as people try to emulate this great nation, this democracy, this place that's had so much in the way of wealth creation and freedoms and all of that. The very best way, I think, for us to demonstrate American exceptionalism to people all around the world right now is for us to show the courage and will to deal with the issues that we have before us. A lot of other countries are dealing with the same thing, and the best way for us to demonstrate American exceptionalism is for us to come together, Republicans and Democrats and independents, and solve these problems. And for what it's worth, as I look around in this room, but also in places I am all around the state and country, I think as I see the soberness in people's eyes, the fear, the concern, I think we're on the cusp. I really do believe this. We're on the cusp of as a country really being able to do that. And I thank you so much for letting me come here today and talk with you about what I see as happening in Washington. I thank you for letting me weigh in on your behalf. And it's a tremendous privilege, as frustrating as it is. And I look forward to any questions and comments that you might have. Thank you very much.
On behalf of our county, I want to thank you and Senator Alexander for the stance that you took on the signs, the reflective
Yeah.
signs that they were mandating that we had to do, which was to replace every sign, stop
Yeah.
sign, yield, whatever.
Yeah.
We had to replace it, we were to replace it with a reflective sign. I wrote you, wrote him, and I know that some other mayors wrote
Yeah.
you too. And you took care of it, and that would have cost us millions and millions and millions of dollars. And throughout the state, it was the same way. So thank you so much for getting that stopped. And we'll gradually get into it, but
Right.
not just like all at once.
Well, when the life of the sign is
Right.
ended, you'll put up the reflective
Right.
sign, which is the intelligent way about going. But listen, thank you, both of you, for your letters. And, it's funny, I was at a meeting not unlike this one. Early on, it was actually in Rutherford County, when somebody came up and mentioned what the federal government was getting ready to make them do. And that's when we began to look at this. And, we crafted a bill. And then automatically, once we did that, the administration stepped away from it and did what I would call the right thing. But thank you for your input.
Sensible thing.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Senator, my name is Joe Johnson. I'm retired military and also civil servant. One thing I keep hearing less and less of is about a balanced budget. And it seems unless we attack that and take the courage to take steps to have a balanced budget,
Yeah.
we're not gaining ground no matter what they do in this supposedly secret committee.
Yeah. First of all, thanks for your service. And guys like you that have done what you've done have provided real public service. Mine's minimal compared to that. But look, I was a original co-sponsor of a balanced budget amendment this year that, obviously didn't pass out of the Senate. It's been a battle that we've had ongoing up there for 20 or 30 years now, and I couldn't agree more that without some mechanism to force us to live within our means, what happens is the American people become focused on it when it's a problem like it is right now. And then the focus leaves when they think things start going in the right direction, and then all of a sudden, Congress again becomes undisciplined. So, I actually had a CAP Act which capped spending relative to our economy's economic output that wasn't a balanced budget amendment, but I actually had Democratic co-sponsors, and it had a chance of passage. It ended up, being derailed. But I agree with you. We need some fundamental mechanism to force us to do what we need to do. At present, though, the only train that's moving down the track is this committee, and I want them to be as successful as they can, because even getting a bite at it is much better than doing nothing. But I share your sentiments. Yes, sir.
Senator, Occupy Wall Street seems to show the frustration in jobs,
Yeah.
but it seems to be counterproductive to not corporations that hire those jobs and put jobs in there.
Yeah.
Has there been discussion at the Senate or in the hallways of what they really want or what's involved here?
I don't want to in any way demean any citizens group, but I'll be honest, nobody's paying a lot of attention. If I were going to demonstrate about the economic conditions of our country, I would demonstrate in Washington. Okay, I really would. I wouldn't go to Wall Street to do it. Really, that's where I'd be. I'd be occupying Washington. But look, people are unhappy in this country. I'm unhappy with where we are. Everybody's disappointed that this great nation, number one, allowed itself to get in a situation where we had a financial crisis. And the bottom line, the amazing thing is, people talk about Wall Street and they talk about derivatives, and for what it's worth, I've spent more than the average bear on all of those issues since I've been there. Yet the bottom line, you know what created this financial crisis? I don't think there's any debate about this, and that is one thing. Americans went out and borrowed money on homes that they couldn't afford. And lenders were willing to do it because everybody was making money in the process. But it was just your basic home mortgages that got this country into the jam that it's in. Now, there's all these derivatives that multiply the effect of it and spread the contagion all around the world. But, I couldn't agree more with you. I mean, to me, we need to be holding up job creators. And I'm going to say something that I know is going to be offensive to some folks in this room, and I understand it, but it's just the way I feel. I really respect the office of president, okay? I do. When the president came and spoke to the Joint Assembly recently, some people boycotted it. I went. I'm a United States Senator. If the president wants to speak to us, I'm going to go. I have good relations with the president. We served together on the Foreign Relations Committee when I was in the Senate. I saw him often. The president's been kind to me. We had flooding down in Memphis. He was going down there. I was the only other elected official on the plane and spent some time talking. He's been kind to me. He took me down there during the flooding time so we could both deal with the issue. So again, I respect the office, but I really disrespect what has been happening lately, where there's been an intentional intent by the administration, in my opinion, to divide the country at a time when we need to be united. I disrespect that, really disrespect it. Typically, when we've had problems like this as a country, people have tried to find ways of bringing folks together. If you go back to the Bowles-Simpson report, many of y'all, again, y'all have your own lives. You got kids to raise, grandkids to raise, soccer games, businesses. You're not paying attention to the daily activities of Washington, thankfully, okay? I mean, you'd be as frustrated as I am. You probably are. But we had the president appointed a bipartisan commission. We had a leading Democrat named Erskine Bowles, who used to be chief of staff to Bill Clinton, who headed it for Democrats. We had a Republican named Alan Simpson, who's a retired Republican senator from Wyoming. And they put together a proposal to deal, by the way, with $4 trillion in deficit reduction over the next 10 years. And instead of embracing that, and by the way, it had tax reform proposals in it that a lot of people on both sides of the aisle supported, and that is doing away with a lot of the tax loopholes that exist for things like ethanol subsidies and all that. Do away with those and lower everybody's rates, and you generate tremendous economic growth in the process. Well, instead of embracing that, we've created this atmosphere, and a lot of it's come from the White House, where in essence, let's attack the people who've created jobs, and let's try to frown upon that. And I'm sorry, I just don't think that's the American way, and especially when there was a commission that he appointed that came up with a proposal that people on both sides of the aisle would have rallied behind had the president accepted it. So I know that I don't mean that to be, again, there are things, I worked with the president on a treaty with Russia very closely, and I thought it was a no-brainer. I thought what he was offering was exactly or close to exactly what ought to happen, and I got behind him. But I don't like the atmosphere that's been created in our country, and I think it's been done purposely, and I just don't respect that. So I know I angered some folks. I apologize. Yes, ma'am.
The TSA has recently expanded from the airports to Tennessee highways, so I have several questions about that. One is, why was Tennessee chosen for this? And two is, what is your opinion of TSA's expanded power?
Yeah, I didn't even know it had happened, so yeah, I'm totally unaware of what you're talking
The
about.
Viper program?
The what?
Expanding to Tennessee?
Yeah.
I wish I'd brought an article for you to read.
Yeah. Well, I tell you what, I'm totally unaware of a transportation. Yeah, totally unaware of it. So again, I'll leave.
50 trucks without, on the highway without any more,
Yeah.
just pulling them over.
Yeah, the TSA, and they chose Tennessee to be
Yeah.
the first state for their pilot program.
Yeah, so as in most of these meetings, I leave with homework, but I really really, I totally no, I am too, and I hope that after the meeting that you and Jane Jolly will exchange emails and all of that, but email addresses. But I'll get on the phone as soon as I get back and try to understand what's happening, if you will, with the TSA and trucks on our streets. I didn't even know what was happening. So thank you. Appreciate it. Yes, sir.
Well, spending $2 million a day, it flows right into debt.
Yeah.
You know, the last 4 years, 3 years, you've spent more than $4 trillion that is debt.
Yeah.
When is it going to stop? Why don't you lop off the energy department? What's the energy department doing being a banker?
Yeah.
And funding an automobile dealer, manufacturer in Finland?
Yeah.
And the travesty that's out there, the $523 million that was spent out in California on the solar plant.
Yeah. Cylinder.
And-
Yeah,
yeah,
cylinder.
Exactly. And the Treasury Department goes in there to investigate, and the government allowed the original investors who put equity in it to get out first, so that the taxpayers get holding
Yeah.
left holding the bag.
Yeah.
And, you know, what kind of accounting and budgeting process, who's minding the store?
Yeah. Well, for what it's worth, in the Senate, there is no budgeting process. We haven't had a budget in the Senate in at least
Well,
9.
you know, the House is where, you know, the spending bills are supposed to take place. And if they would just cut off the money,
Yeah.
you know, the snake would die.
Well, for what it's worth, it's been a good while since I voted for an appropriations bill. And, you know, until we have a budget, I voted against something. This gentleman's a veteran, and I voted against a bill that supported veterans just 90 days or so ago. I was one of 2 votes in the entire United States Senate to vote against it. I support what the bill does, but I couldn't vote for it if we don't even have the courage and the will to have a budget in the United States Senate. So you know, we did establish a top line under this Budget Control Act, but look, I couldn't agree more. Just remember it when when I come back up again, when you hear all kind of people running ads on television that Bob Corker voted against this and he voted against that. Please know the reason I did that is because I have the same concerns that you have, and there's just been no real effort, in my opinion, to live within our means. So I couldn't agree more.
You're familiar in caucus with the medical doctor, Tom Coburn?
I'm going to be with him Sunday night. Yes, sir. I'm very familiar with him.
Seems like he's got a lot of sense.
He and I were the 2 votes that voted against the bill I just talked about. I agree with you. So.
You know, the guy in the Oval Office calls him what, Dr. No?
Well, he and the guy in the Oval Office, believe it or not, this may, I think a lot of people, they look at us differing on policies. I'm talking about Republicans and Democrats. On the other hand, there's not like enmity individually between each of us. For what it's worth, the closest friend to President Obama in Washington is Tom Coburn. As it relates to talking about spiritual issues, they talk once a week. They spend a lot of time together, but they could not disagree more on the issue of spending. So they try to stay away from policy when they talk. Yes, sir.
Do you think, how serious does Congress take the Postal Service problems?
Seriously, there are several bills, that are trying to be coordinated right now to deal with the Postal Service issue. And it's interesting, the Postal Service has tremendous financial issues. And, I go around to counties and cities around our state, and I'll give the same kind of talk that I'm giving now. And especially when I'm doing it with just economic development folks, they're, way to go, that's exactly right. But, it's interesting, at the end of a lot of these meetings, the mayor or some official will say, gosh, I agree with everything you just said, Corker, but we do have this post office in our community that they're thinking about closing, and we want you to weigh in on it. I say, look, guys, you cannot ask me to try to get our country's fiscal house in order on one hand, and then on the other hand, get me to lobby on your behalf regarding a post office, I'm not going to do it. The one in my neighborhood has been slated to close. I'm just sorry. I'm not going to do that. I mean, each community has to itself try to justify to the Postal Service why post offices ought to be there. But you know, part of the problem with the Postal Service, believe it or not, is us. Because we will not give the Postal Service the freedom to do the things that any other business would do to survive. So that's what the thrust of many of these bills are, is to actually, you know, make them responsible for their liabilities, but also give them the freedom to actually try to operate. On one hand, Congress says, live within your means. On the other hand, Congress says, but you got to have Saturday delivery, you got to have this, you got to have this, you got to have this. That's no way to run a railroad or a postal service.
So you feel like
Yeah.
the legislation will give the post office more ability to control their own fate?
I do. I think everything that's being looked at is in that regard, yes, sir. And you know what you have is this rub where, especially people who are in more rural areas, you know, on one hand, they're defending, you know, having a post office open where 8 people come in and out of there a day, but it's the only. And what we found, for what it's worth, when communities want to keep a postal operation open and they know it's slated to close, they can get pretty creative. I mean, you know, we're finding places where instead of having a freestanding building with a lot of folks there, I mean, you can open up a kiosk inside of a retail facility that's just as convenient, and yet you don't have to have it staffed in the same way that you do the other facility. You don't have the electricity and all of those issues to deal with. So I do. I think there's going to be some flexibilities given. Are you with the Postal Service?
No.
Yeah.
Because it's
Sorry.
easy.
Yes, sir. Yeah. Yes, sir.
Senator Corker, I appreciate you coming here today and helping us in Washington. And I'll have to brag on Tennessee a little bit. Brian Hale, who you know, been working on the exchanges in Tennessee and doing a great job. And also, you probably know that there was a convention, a meeting conference in San Francisco a couple of weeks ago, and Tennessee had an extra 2 members out there on the broker's side, and the rest of the country was very impressed with what was being done in Tennessee and with Brian Hale and his work. With the decision from Secretary of Sebelius about the Class Act,
Right.
and there seems to be some confusion about that on a funding issue, whether there's enough money there to run it or not. Do you think that in the future, before 2012, that the administration will realize that that is a huge funding issue and it might not be enough for this health care reform they're talking about?
I don't, first of all, I try not to use hyperbole or exaggerate, but I think there are very few people in Washington that truly believe the health care bill, I'm talking about both sides of the aisle, as laid out will work. Okay, I think people understand what's getting ready to happen. As far as any changes happening in it, as I mentioned, you've got this one issue that I think we'll deal with, but I don't think there's any way the administration is in any form or fashion going to allow anything happen that changes the bill other than things like Kathleen Sebelius laid out, which says that the Class Act, which was a $72 billion contributor towards the health care bill passing, just financially is not feasible. I want to tell you something interesting. I used to build Walmarts all around the country, or at least in a lot of states around the country, and built food lines and Kroger's and all those kind of things. And you know, I met Sam Walton, you know, and he used to fly around his little private plane and show up on the job site. You'd never know he was there. And he was really a sort of an independent, you know, somebody that I think most of us respected greatly. When the bill passed, the health care bill was actually being debated, Walmart was in our office lobbying for its passage, which shocked me. Shocked me. So anyway, and what got me about the health care bill as much as anything, I'm a numbers guy, is that there was no way the math just didn't work. I mean, when you're going to take $539 billion out out of Medicare. I just gave you the numbers on Medicare. And, you know, we got some issues we got to work through there to make sure that it's solvent and there for people to be able to use. We took $539 billion out of the Medicare program to create, instead of solving some of the Medicare problems that we had, and we used it to create this new program. And there were all kinds of accounting gimmicks that, had they been done in the private sector, you know, no telling what would have happened to you. But here's what's getting ready to happen. Walmart, I think you know, in the last 7 days, has announced now that they're ending their health care. And they're going to dump their employees out on this public exchange. And so now we will be paying for the Walmart employees as they go out on this public exchange. And for what it's worth, that's what's going to happen in most every business in our country. Governor Bredesen is a good friend of mine. I've worked with him on lots of economic development issues. When he was mayor of Nashville, I was commissioner of finance, and we worked together to bring the Titans to our state. When I was in the United States, when I was mayor of Chattanooga and he was governor, he helped build an interchange that later, when I was senator and he was governor, we were able to bring Volkswagen to Chattanooga, my hometown. Very close working relationship. He wrote a great op-ed in the Wall Street Journal stating that the state of Tennessee could save $160 million a year by ending its health care and putting all the state employees out on the exchange. So what you're going to see happen, and I think most people acknowledge this is what's going to happen. If you can pay a $2,000 or $3,000 fine and be done with it with an employee that you might have been paying $10,000 a year for their benefits, in this country of free enterprise and capitalism, you kind of, you do what's in your self-interest as a company. And so that's what's going to happen. So the cost of this, which people said was going to be X, is going to be 2 or 3X. So here's what I'm saying. Regardless of what happens between now and the election, and I know there's going to be a Supreme Court ruling on the mandate piece itself, probably before the end of June. I think the administration has requested that the Supreme Court rule on it. Regardless of what happens there, I'm totally convinced that the health care issue after January of 2013, regardless of who gets elected, is something that is going to have to be reopened, because just the order of magnitude that we're talking about dwarfs many of the other things that I just talked about. So, to me, it's going to create a lot of uncertainties, right? I'll give you a great example. I know a guy out in West Tennessee who's been operating fast food operations for a long, long time, and he happens to be a really good operator where he's had employees who've worked with him for a long, long time, and that's unusual in that industry. And I think that if you have over, I think it's 50 employees, and the employee works over 30 hours a week, you have to, now you have certain standards that you have to, adhere to as it relates to covering their health insurance. So he's in a pickle. He's sitting there saying, I love these employees. I mean, I've kind of grown up with them. And I've got to make a decision as to whether I now, because of this law, do I cause each of them to work under 30 hours and then get a job someplace else to make up the difference? What do I do? My margins are not, thick enough. We operate on volume to be able to do what the law now says. So you do create this flux. And then I know that a lot of people on my side of the aisle say this, and I know that it sounds like rhetoric, but I really do believe that it's created some of the uncertainties that exist out in the employment market, because I don't think people yet know how that's going to affect them. And that uncertainty, or the concern that there may be a lot more in the way of additional cost, I do think it's caused people to try to be far more efficient and figure out other ways without hiring people. Some people are doing through temporary orgs where they don't have to, have the benefits. But I think it's actually hurt our employment in this country.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
We've gone several minutes now, and I haven't heard foreign policy. I haven't heard the Arab Spring. I haven't heard immigration, I haven't heard Attorney General Holder and what he's done with the cartels.
Yeah.
Would you like to speak to any of those?
Sure, and please understand, I'm at a chamber event, and economics is mostly what people come to chamber events about. Look, I probably will have a minority view in this group, but Libya, I couldn't understand what was in our national interest in Libya, and it concerned me that I know this sounds really terrible. Gaddafi was a really, really bad person, terrible person. But our country had diplomatic relations with them. I don't know if you remember, but 4 or 5 or 6 years ago, he kind of came in out of the woods and said he'd act decent, and we established diplomatic relations. So all of a sudden, we have diplomatic relations with a country, and we're bombing them. I thought that was somewhat unusual. The other thing Gaddafi was doing is again, bad guy, okay? Bad guy. I don't support Gaddafi, but he was working with us with al-Qaeda because al-Qaeda was a threat to his country. So if you look at what's in our national interest, I didn't see it. Now, on the other hand, when you see democracy movements, you want to see people flourish. You really do. And I hope the country ends up being stable. And I know a lot of people wanted us, on my side of the aisle, candidly, were saying, send in a ton of force. Let's get this over with. I actually met with some of their leaders. I think it was a good thing that it took them as long as it did to be successful, because these rebels had to come together and figure out a way of managing themselves and working together and creating some shadow ministries and all of that. But I don't know where this Arab Spring is going. I know that we're a country that espouses democracy and human rights, and I'm proud that we do. But in Egypt, look, the very first thing that happened after Mubarak was taken down is the border between Egypt and Israel became very porous, and all kinds of materials made it into one of our, greatest allies in the world. Now it looks like the Muslim Brotherhood which is, for those of you who don't, again, live and breathe this on a daily basis, they're an Islamic extremist group. It looks like they have the upper hand in much of the election, so we could end up in a similar situation to what we did and what happened in Gaza, where we as a country and a Republican president pressed for there to be elections in the Gaza area, which again, I can tell you, I've traveled up and down without anybody knowing I'm a senator and without any security to see the living conditions in Gaza. But we ended up with an extremist government there that's a terrorist organization that thinks that Israel ought to be ended. Okay, so when you won't see me out there, pounding my chest on the Arab Spring. I'm happy that people are striving on one hand for democracy and human rights, but sometimes countries are not quite ready for that. They don't have the institutions in place, and a lot of times these extreme groups are actually far more organized. They have something that binds them together, and you can end up in a really bad situation. So I think the jury's out. Tunisia obviously is a first step, and some semi-decent things have happened there, but look, I'm very concerned. I'm concerned what it's going to mean for Israel down the road. And I will say this, going back to Libya. I spent a lot of time talking to General Cartwright at the Pentagon over our operations in Libya. And after, it was decided that we were going there, my next concern was, are we going to escalate? Are we going to let this turn into the same kind of nation-building activities that we've had going in other places? And I will commend the administration on this from my perspective, and I realize it might be a minority view in this room. I'm glad that all we did was offer the kind of support we did, and we didn't send boots on the ground, and we didn't get involved in the way that we have in other places. And now the question is, I know that Secretary Clinton is there. And by the way, for what it's worth, I highly respect her. She's been good to work with. I mean, she's strong. I mean, she is strong. I haven't agreed with every position, but she will stand up and say what she thinks ought to happen. She's over there last week, and I guess my only next concern is we're beginning to let some aid flow into there, and I just don't want us as a country to get involved again in another nation-building effort. So I can tell the hook is here, Jim. I'd go around the world with you if you want on foreign relations, but I got into it a little bit, and I appreciate you asking the question. Okay, thank you.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but I had been instructed by his boss to get him out of here on time, and that's what we're going to do, or she wouldn't take our picture, I don't guess, or she'd do something to us. But ladies from
in my line of work, it being from Washington, I'm just glad if anybody wants their photo taken.
Well, I appreciate you coming and not using this as a campaign time like we've been seeing lately, it looks like. Yeah. Every time they get out of Washington, they start trying to campaign, and it's several months away. But we look forward. I hope you'll come back again and present your facts like you've done today to the people. And we've got a super community here. Lincoln Countyans will do anything for you. And we just really, really appreciate it. Ladies of Chamber that are responsible for getting this little gift up here, I'd like to have y'all. Doris? Who else? Tell me. Get them up here.
I thought someone from Frito-Lay was going to be here. But
You can tell him what it's about.
this is filled with products from Frito-Lay, which is one of our industries here in Lincoln County, and we're so glad that you were here today to share your message with us and spend time with us and answer some of our questions and concerns. So thank you very much for being here.
Thank you for everything you did to organize this, and I noticed all kind of health food products.
Absolutely. All low calorie.
I like all of these, so thank you very much.
Very good.
But now, Senator, that's supposed to go back to your office.
Yeah,
so
go
that,
back to my office. I think there's a limitation on what I can accept. This may be at the haul me out,
That's all right.
That's an awfully expensive
But you could
deal.
use it
It'll
as
go back.
a bribery or anything to get them to vote the way
I
you.
think coming from y'all, it's okay. And
That's
our office will use
But again, we'd like to thank you on behalf of all of our citizens. We thank them, all of y'all, for coming today. And this is what we need, is more communications with our public officials and shoot straight with them. And that's what you've done today, and I appreciate it.
Well, thank you, and I'll be looking into Viper.
Thank you all for coming.